Aloha and welcome to the G'day Sally show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. And tonight I'm going to be reading another story from my book, Footsteps to Fairy Forest. And remember, it's about a little girl who finds a map, and on the map there's 26 footsteps, and each day she sets out to find another footstep. And when she finds a footstep, she meets another fairy. So we're up to footstep 7. By now I was getting used to meeting another fairy every day, and I thought about telling my grandma about the fairies, but I worried that she wouldn't believe me, so I didn't. Sometimes grown-ups don't seem to believe children when they tell them some of the secrets of the world. I began to wonder how many fairies there might be, and whether I would get to meet them all before I had to start school that year. But I thought I should just set out each day and see what happened and hope that I would keep meeting fairies. I was super excited today because when I checked my map this morning, it showed me that the sign for footstep 7 was a tiny green jade bead in the shape of a dragon. For a minute and a second I was worried that I might meet a real dragon, but then I remembered that dragons haven't been seen for a long time, so I would probably be quite safe and not see a real dragon today. As I walked along the path in a southeast direction to footstep 7, a little bird was following along behind me. It had a tail like a fan, and it kept swishing its tail as it flew. I thought it would just fly ahead of me and disappear, but it kept just above me and a little behind. So I started to look upon it as my guardian for the day. As the sun started to get warmer, I could see some sort of a building ahead of me on the path, and I wondered what it was and how I was going to get past it. Then I heard some hoofbeats and a horse whinnied. As I got closer, I could see that it was stables for horses. Now, I've never been right up close to a horse, so I was a bit scared to get too close. I walked up to the gate as it was right in the middle of my path. I stopped and looked at all the horses in their stalls. Should I just push open the gate and go through and keep walking? It was as if I was standing there wondering what to do that my bird guardian landed right on top of the gate and started to swish his tail around as if to tell me that I should just open the gate and keep on my path. I looked over at the horses again, and they all seemed to be quiet, so I did as the bird suggested and was soon through the gate and on my way again. Then I started to wonder if perhaps the jade dragon bead might have been buried in the dirt of the horse stables. But I didn't want to have to turn back, so I kept walking with my eyes looking downward. Suddenly the bird flew over my head and landed on the path in front of me. It started to peck at the dirt, and I thought perhaps it was hungry and it was digging for a worm. But when I reached it, I could see that it had uncovered a tiny green bead. When I picked it up from under the bird, I could see that it was in the shape of a dragon. "Thanks, bird," I said as I got out my spade and started to dig down for footstep 7. As soon as I found the pebble with footstep 7 on it, I sat down to wait for the next fairy. I held the green dragon in my hand and was polishing off the dirt when I looked up. The bird was gone. Just then I saw a brilliant green flash and a splash of blue just near me, and I just knew that the fairy had arrived. She said her name was GEMMINIDA and that she was the fairy of gemstones, and then I fell asleep. So now we're going to hear about GEMMINIDA, the fairy of gemstones. GEMMINIDA, fairy of gemstones, pulled out her magic wand to wave it over the roots of a huge tree. The tree had complained that there were gemstones caught up in its roots, stopping the tree from moving forward into an underground stream so that it could soak up more water. This tree was growing so fast that it needed more and more water every day. GEMMINIDA flew steadily just above the ground where the tree roots were being stopped. Then, waving her magic fairy wand, which was made of tiny gems and crystals, she spoke very softly as she said her spell. "Unicorn universe unusual, free-flowing fibers from gems growing gravelly, tree tines travel toes." She could immediately see that her spell was working, as the tree started to stretch its branches and its roots, which caused ruffles in the ground. As she raised her fairy wand again, the gemstones that had been caught in the tree's roots rose up out of the ground and attached themselves to her wand. GEMMINIDA was amazed at what she saw. Gemstones in the forest are usually bright colours, reds and greens and blues and golden and many other colours, but these gemstones had no colour. "What has happened to these gemstones?" she thought, astonished. "I have never seen this happen before." GEMMINIDA turned them over, but both sides were the same. Perhaps these gemstones are from some other forest where gemstones have no colour, but if so, how did they get in between the trees' roots? "I better go and check on all the forest gemstones to see if there are any more that have lost their colours." The fairy flew up into the sky so she could check out all the forest gemstones at once. As she got high enough, she waved her fairy wand over the forest, saying her spell. "Unicorn, universe unusual. Stones show selves shortly. Rise rapid rightly. Colours clear currently." All at once, gemstones started to rise up from the ground, up through the trees and through fields of flowers. The fairy of gemstones was astonished as she looked at them. All the gemstones, which previously had been sparkling in beautiful colours, had lost all their colour. She could not believe her eyes. "Whatever has happened?" she said, amazed. "Only one thing to do. I must consult with Yastaramta. Maybe she will know what has happened. But first I must take all these gemstones back to the gemstone birthing cave until I can correct what has happened to take away all their colours." Soon the creatures of the forest were amazed to see GEMMINIDA flying through the forest, followed by a long parade of stones. Not the bright colourful ones they were used to seeing, but a long train of colourless gemstones which they had never seen before. As soon as the fairy had deposited all the gemstones back inside their birthing cave, she flew to the shady glade that led to Yastaramta's green grassy meditation mat. Now, as you know, Yastaramta is the meditating fairy, and GEMMINIDA found her floating lightly above her meditation mat with her eyes firmly shut. She waited, as she did not want to disturb Yastaramta's meditative mood. With her eyes still shut, Yastaramta fairy said, "You are wondering why all the gemstones have lost their colours, aren't you, GEMMINIDA?" "Yes, exactly," said GEMMINIDA. "It is very worrying. I see a jealous cloud of evil intentions. It has been created by an ogre who grew up underground in the dark. It has affected him all his life, which until now didn't bother us, but he has just moved to Fairy Forest, and he was overcome by all the beautiful coloured gemstones. So he found a book of witches' spells, and he cast the spell in his loud ogre voice to drain all the forest gemstones of their beautiful colours." GEMMINIDA Fairy was upset. "That is terrible. I will have to deal with that ogre and make a special spell to bring all the colours back. Yastaramta, would you please project the image of that dastardly ogre on the leaves of that tree so that I will know him when I see him?" So, still with her eyes closed, Yastaramta pointed her magic fairy wand at the tree and projected the ogre's image on the tree so that GEMMINIDA would recognise him when she saw him. He was huge, and he had a very stony, hard look on his face. The surprising thing was that he had green hair, and when GEMMINIDA asked Yastaramta about that, the meditating fairy said that because he had grown up underground, his hair had grown full of moss, so that was why it was green. "Well, why would he be upset about gemstones that are sometimes green then?" GEMMINIDA asked Yastaramta. "Because his father, who was also an ogre, always blamed his mother for his green hair." Now, not many people know this, but sometimes fairies' magic spells have a hard time overcoming a witch's spell. So GEMMINIDA knew that she would have to work very hard to undo what that ogre had done to all the gemstones in her care. She wanted to meet the ogre before she said her spell to return the colours back to all the gemstones. So she flew all around the forest looking for him. Finally, she found him asleep inside a big hollow log. It was such a big log that he could fit right inside it. Politely, the fairy knocked on the edge of the log. "Mr. Ogre, please wake up. I need to talk to you." Then she heard a loud growl followed by a scuffling noise. At last the ogre poked his head out of the hollow log. "Growl," he said. "Who is disturbing my sleep?" GEMMINIDA curtsied to him and introduced herself. She was a very polite fairy. "I am one of the fairies who live in this forest, and it is my job to take care of all the gemstones that live here too. I am GEMMINIDA, the fairy of gemstones." By this time the ogre had slid right out of the hollow log, and he was standing up so high that GEMMINIDA had to fly up and sit almost on his shoulder so he could see her. "Well, I am Gobbling Gemstones Greedy, and I don't like gemstones of any colour," he said, "so I've taken all their colours away." "Yes, I know," said GEMMINIDA. "That's the trouble. You see, gemstones have an important job in any forest. They catch the sunbeams as they fall out of the sky, and they reflect colours so that trees can grow, and so that animals and birds and fairies," she added quickly, "will be healthy. Why, even ogres need gemstones to reflect the colours that are locked up in each sunbeam. Otherwise, even ogres like you would get sick." The ogre looked puzzled. "How do they reflect the colours of the sunbeams, and why don't they all reflect the same colour then?" "I'm glad you asked that question," said GEMMINIDA. "Inside each ray of sunlight there's every colour that you could imagine. Some gemstones have chosen to reflect blue light, some green, some red, some orange, some yellow, and so on." The ogre scratched his head. "You mean that even ogres like me need the colours that the gemstones reflect to stay well?" "Yes," said GEMMINIDA, "exactly." "So I might get sick now because the gemstones are not coloured anymore?" "That is a real possibility," said the fairy. Well, I don't know how to undo that witch's spell. In fact, when she found that I had her book of spells, she was very angry, and she said that if she ever saw me again, she would make me very sorry. That's why I was hiding in this hollow log, but I can't stay here forever." "Well," said GEMMINIDA, "if I undo that witch's spell, will you behave and live here peacefully and never put any spells on anything or anyone again?" The ogre looked sheepish. "Yes," he said, "I promise. But will you find that witch and tell her that I'm sorry?" Now that GEMMINIDA knew that the ogre had learned his lesson, and that the witch was angry at him, and she hadn't put the spell on the gemstones herself, she knew that her spell would work to restore the colours to all the forest gemstones. She flew quickly back to the birthing cave, where she gathered all the gemstones together. Then she waved her fairy wand and spread her spell over them all. Unicorn, universe, unusual. Colours coming quickly, gemstones great and small, rainbows reflecting right. And as she finished her spell, she could see all the beautiful colours returning to all the gemstones in the birthing cave. Then she flew them in a long trail of rainbow colours back through the forest to all their special spots where they could once again reflect each colour for the health of everyone. Finally, she flew all around the forest until she found the witch whose book of spells that Gemstones Gobbling Greedy, the ogre, had stolen. At first the witch was not very friendly, but once GEMMINIDA explained to her that Gemstones Gobbling Greedy, the ogre, wanted to say sorry for stealing her book of spells, she was more peaceful, and quite thankful that GEMMINIDA had come to tell her. She said she would not pursue Gemstones Gobbling Greedy, the ogre, and if she ever saw him again she would leave him alone. So that's another story from my book, Footsteps to Fairy Forest. And that one was called GEMMINIDA because she is the fairy of gemstones. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com.